the thousands of New Zealanders who live day to day unsure of whether or not their welfare will be cut or their landlord will kick them out of their homes, the status quo of the social safety net is clearly not working. What will work is a guaranteed, unconditional income which will allow these people to plan for their future and lift themselves out of poverty. What do we support in today's debate? A universal basic income, which covers things like food, water, and rent at agreed upon prices based on the economy. It would be unconditional and it would be given to all members of society. However, because it would be paid for by an increasing income tax on the upper middle and upper income tax brackets, these groups would be paying their income, their UBI back through this tax, and so would essentially not receive anything. However, they would still receive a payment. It would just be balanced out by this tax. Our path to victory today is proving that the universal basic income, or the UBI, is the best way and better than other systems such as targeted welfare, help disadvantaged people and communities who are the most important group in today's debate. Today, I'll be discussing two major points. Firstly, why the universal basic income is preferable to other systems, such as the status quo of a targeted welfare system. And secondly, how a UBI changes people's economic incentives. On to my first point, why the UBI is preferable to the current status quo of a targeted welfare system. So currently, for the vast majority of people in New Zealand working who need a welfare benefit, what they see when they try to get it is a huge amount of red tape and bureaucracy. So for people trying to get a disabled permit to help them get benefits if they're working or if they're out of work, it's an insane process to go through the work people. And it's the same for people looking for a job seeker benefit, and often these people just can't get it. As well as this, it's a very long process, and it means that they find it quite hard to get it. So for someone who's, say, moving around rental homes, someone who doesn't have a job, they have a huge amount of instability, and that's going to be both worsened by the effects of our current system, where you have to qualify for a certain thing and you have to receive a certain benefit in order to get this welfare. So people who are in this unstable situation are often less able to get the welfare because they're less able to apply for it, and also the effects of the long term. Of the long time that they have to wait in order to get this welfare means that the long-term effects of this are worsened. And these are the groups, these unemployed groups, these disabled people are the people who we think are the most important in today's debate. And we've seen things in the current climate of post-COVID or continuing with COVID and economic recessions like 2008. For people to spend the time proving that they're unemployed, or to even manage to prove at all that they're unemployed, this safety net that we have currently is not good enough. That work mean that the people are stuck in a vicious cycle where bills build up as they wait for their welfare to come through, or if they don't get it at all because they're not able to have time to prove that they need the welfare. They don't manage to get any savings. And what that means is these people are left in the lurch, and there's no real safety net for these people in major economic recessions. Furthermore, a safety net prevents what we see as a kind of wage slavery. So it's not just in terms of the welfare, but because these people, if we see a UBI, we see that people are in a less precarious position, and they're better able to bargain for better conditions because they don't have, firstly, they don't have a transition period where they're in a struggle and they're unable to get their welfare, and what that means is that they're better able to go to their boss and say, hey, I want better things, I want better conditions, I want more money, and that means that because they know that if they get kicked out, they've at least got this backup behind them, which they don't have currently. They don't have a good enough safety net, and the last political benefits for these groups. So currently we see constantly in society, welfare people are demonized. We saw the impact on Materia Ture, who said that she needed welfare, but she couldn't get it. So she faked her credentials in order to get a welfare benefit. And she was absolutely demonized by New Zealand society. People who are detached from the real reality of being poor hate on targeted welfare. But what are the UBI differences is that these people would be receiving the UBI too, and it's seen as more fair. So it's the same thing we see with free tertiary education across society. We're going to see less people compared to targeted things. People are okay with that because they see it as being fair. And what that means is we're going to have a more united society because people are less likely to demonize these groups and hate on them. My second point is about how a UBI changes people's economic incentives. Currently, what we see in society is situations like students being forced to drop out of school in order to help their parents make money in the short term. Or they can decide that they're not able to go to university because they don't know if they're going to be able to actually survive and make enough money to keep living while they're studying at university. And why is this? It's because of a lack of certainty that perpetuates inequality. People at the top of the ladder have certainty. They can make plans. They can keep going. People at the bottom don't have that. Can't make plans. They can't mobilize up the social ladder. We've seen things like this with injuries. So if I'm injured and I have already have wealth, it doesn't matter to me. I can just rely on my savings for a certain amount of time. But for people without a safety net of any kind, an injury could take them out of the workforce and cripple them financially forever, forcing them to rely on a welfare which they don't even know if is going to continue. And what we see the result of this being is more and more inequality in society. We see people turning to crime. We see worse early childhood development because people are having to, people are forced to leave their children elsewhere in order to try and get work. So we see that people's circumstances in life are not depending on merit or hard work. They're just depending on whether their family is rich. And how does a UBI specifically solve this? Because it provides constant, unconditional source of income. You don't have to prove anything and it's instant. So you lose the likelihood of losing your job, of losing bills or losing like your tenancy because you're able to keep that up. And that means that what that means for you is that you're able to use your income in the present as well from your work because you know that the things that you have to have, you can pay for and you're always going to be able to pay for. You can instead focus on things like education, better quality clothes, early childhood care for your children. Allows a long-term focus for these people in involvement and circulation in the economy. So it's going to improve economic outcomes across society. It's also going to have a generational impact which allows the lifting up through a focus on better outcomes for themselves and their futures. We are the side which gives the best aid to those who need it most by providing a stable income which allows disadvantaged groups to rise out of poverty. Proud to propose.
Thank the speaker for this speech and welcome the first speaker from the negating team to open their team's case.
I didn't get mine. Okay. Have you got the timer sorted, Robert? Let's look at the opposing team's world for a second. Let's say a family of 6 living just above the minimum wage get a few $1,000s a month. The opposing team believes that this will suddenly solve every inequality in the world. However, they don't take into account hyperinflation, raising food prices by 200%. They don't take into account employers slashing the wages of these employees just because they already have this UBI to protect them. They don't take into account governments passing off accountability to remove any other welfare payments or subsidizations of services in the economy. In fact, these poor communities have to dismally accept this new situation. We don't support a UBI. We tell you that the universal basic income harms the quest to achieve equality in the world and doesn't solve the fundamental problems creating poverty and this poverty cycle, like racism, institutional barriers, like failure to access education. We support taxes and government spending being allocated to far greater effect to specific policies, such as raising the unemployment benefit for people who are actually on the job seekers allowance, targeting trying to re-enter society and contribute specific subsidization of basic necessities like foodstuff, affordable housing, education, these things that people will still fail to afford under UBI. We're bringing you 3 points today. Firstly, why the country shouldn't have to support people who don't contribute to society. Secondly, why it is ineffective in solving social issues. And thirdly, a split about the backlash of taxpayers who feel like they shouldn't have to bear this burden. But firstly, some rebuttal. We think that it's not true that it takes so long to go through red tape and bureaucracy. In fact, it only takes a couple minutes to fill out the application form for the Jobs Seekers Allowance, and there's no mechanism of proof to why all this bureaucracy exists. We think that welfare in New Zealand is actually quite well established. It's been around for a very long time, and it's quite easy and accessible to navigate. We also think that it's not true that these people will be in a better position to bargain with their firms. We think firms are less likely to pay them extra wages, as I will explain in my second substantive, because they know that they already have this universal basic income. We do have a good social safety net, like the unemployment benefit, and that we provide this sense of certainty around people, because if they know that they're unemployed, they know that New Zealand has one of the best welfare states in the world, and in fact, under our policies, we will actually help increase this to protect them. A constant safe UBI is actually really harmful to these people because it makes them complacent. It makes them feel like they can coast off of this constant safe policy rather than actually try to improve their lives, try to get to the income standards that these rich people, these rich families already have, these rich upper middle class people. So firstly, why does the country shouldn't have to support people who don't contribute to society? We acknowledge that this debate is about helping those in poverty. However, there is a distinction to be made. There's the first group, where we support people who are actually engaging and trying to rise up out of poverty. This looks like people on the job seekers allowance, actively seeking for employment, petitioning for these government grants and benefits that are really easy to access, these already available welfare payments. These individuals are striving for self-improvement, and we support taxes being sent to support them. The second group of people are those benefiting from the UBI, who will never actually make an attempt to gain higher income, will never actually go to their firm and try to bargain with them, because they feel like they don't have to work or expend effort. They can just live off of this universal basic income for the rest of their life. This is more important to them than actually having to expend effort. Firstly, we think that welfare payments are there as a safety net under the assumption that you will eventually rise out of the situation. They were never designed to be long-lasting. They were always designed to be temporary. They were designed as protective measures to protect the most vulnerable. However, they were designed to provide a boosting, a launching pad for you to rejoin society and escape your situation, not to hopelessly and dismally live off a almost passable meager living wage. We think that when people are just coasting along, not actually looking for a job and not re-entering society, we shouldn't place the burden on taxpayers. Secondly, we think that these individuals who are fine to accept this impoverished status under the UBI, they see it as a chance to exploit the system. They see it as a chance to take advantage of this government spending. When you don't force the individual to care about self-improvement, when you don't provide these qualifications where you actually have to spend a couple days of the week actually searching for a job, you don't actually help them in the long run, because you're not incentivizing them to look for ways to better themselves. We think that individuals sign the social contract when they pay taxes to the government. They say, you can use our money to develop infrastructure and protections of our rights and liberties so that it actually benefits me. It's an exchange and a trade-off, like a thing that we agree to. When individuals don't pay taxes, they don't pay this price for governmental protection, and they're just coasting along on this UBI, it's an unfair burden to place when they're squandering taxpayer money and they're refusing to engage with the setup system in the country. Thirdly, we think it actually harms these poorer communities. Since the UBI is a blanket system, it gives money to everyone willy-nilly, regardless of need or that individual's actual things that they need to survive. This means that millions of dollars are being wasted given to rich middle upper class families that are literal millionaires rather than to the poor families who need it. This looks like giving $40,000 a year to a family of four who lives in a 5-bedroom house in a lifestyle block where both parents already have 6-figure earnings so that they can buy a new car with this extra $40,000 rather than using that $40,000 of government spending to give this to build 4 blocks of affordable housing for the actual homeless community who are burning their possessions in the street just to warm themselves in the winter. You spread this vital economic aid too thinly on the other side of the house. It's not fair to provide governmental protections that actually do not work. So why is this policy ineffective in solving social issues? We think that you're only morally justified in providing a universal basic income if you're contingent in proving that this is a better alternative than targeted subsidization and benefits that we provide. Firstly, it wastes government revenue, giving this income to rich families that don't deserve it, as I've already said. The money is significantly better spent not just giving $1,000 to everyone, but subsidizing specific basic necessities like home brand brands of bread or milk, where that only poor communities buy, rather than only benefiting the rich that don't actually need it. Building affordable housing in the middle of our housing market crisis, we promote efficient processes of government spending that doesn't waste money giving it to the rich who don't deserve it. Secondly, we don't think that you solve institutional barriers on your side of the house. We tell you that a universal income is too simplistic a policy and doesn't account for the actual root causes of poverty. Things like racism and institutional barriers, things like lacking access to education, or not performing well under pressurized test conditions. Just because you have a couple $100s a month doesn't mean that you can stop working. It doesn't mean that you can stop going to school. There's also other barriers to entry, barriers around gender stereotypes in women in the workforce or lack of access to affordable, healthy diets. With policies such as subsidizing worker training, actually promoting trade pathways and skills like this, offering free healthcare necessities, not just giving people a lump sum of money, you target the actual root causes of poverty. Thirdly, there's an incentive for government to just abandon such policy. We think that the government will pass off its culpability to benefit poor communities. Supposedly everyone starts off in the same position. Therefore, when everyone is on the equal footing, if you still fail in the system, then the government thinks that you weren't disadvantaged at all. We gave you every opportunity, even though that's not true. Even though the rich people still have private tutors, they still have the same networking access of their parents. Even though they see this divide, the government doesn't think that they have that responsibility anymore. We think that this just means poor communities have to accept that other government spendings are going to be taken away. Finally, we tell you that that it doesn't improve living standards. This is seen in firstly that there will be extreme inflationary effects. Firms will be raising prices to take advantage of all the extra money consumers has. This looks like when you get $1,000 a month, but your rent has gone up by 200% to $500 a month. Your weekly groceries costs $400 a month. Now you're just continuing to live your life the same way you were in the previous situation. You don't improve living standards, and you don't improve anything for these poor marginalized communities we are proud to propose.
Thank the speaker for this speech and welcome the second speaker from Kahurangi-Marlborough to continue their team's case.
At the moment, we're missing a speaker. Should we wait for them to come back? You're muted. I can't hear.
Have you lost one of your speakers?
Yeah, I think he's just in the bathroom or something.
Oh, it's fine. I'll wait for him to come back. No problems. It's all right.
Okay. Okay, cool.
You let me know when he's back and we can start. All right.
Yeah. Okay, so these are up. The negating team in today's debate can talk all they like about inefficiency and the lack of obligation that we have to provide to people who don't contribute. But what they neglected to consider was the situations of New Zealanders made redundant by sudden economic shock, such as a recession, such as the coronavirus, that don't know when their next meal for their family will be, or whether they will wake up the next morning with a roof over their head. We exclusively eliminate this debilitating uncertainty with a universal basic income. Two main clashes in today's debate, whether we have like an obligation or like a right to like support so-called non-contributors, and also whether this actually harms whether this is like beneficial for poor families or not. So firstly then, onto our material about how we don't have this obligation to support non-contributors. So what did the negating side tell us on this point? They told us that non-contributors, when receiving the UBI, will just like coast off this living wage and like won't ever like feel incentivized to like contribute to society or like mobilize up the social ladder, and that we shouldn't have to support them because they like signed a social contract when they decided to pay taxes or whatever. What are our responses to this? First, that we've stated in our model that like the UBI is only enough money to cover like very basics, right? Things like the ability to pay rates or like bills or like rent or food or water. It's not like there's not a lot of like leeway in the UBI to like spend on like frivolous things like there's not a lot of like leeway in the UBI to spend on like things that like people don't need, or like things that that means right that like if they want to have like a comfortable lifestyle in which they can just coast around like the negating team states, then like they still have the incentive to like go into the employment market and try and get that. Secondly, we say that we actually listen the extent to which people coast around, right? Because what the UBI does when it's when it's a guaranteed unconditional payment is it provides people with certainty. This means that they know that down the line that they won't like suddenly lose their like tenancy because because they'll lose their job. They know that they'll be able to feed their family even if they become redundant. That means that they'll be able to make choices like staying in school until the end of NCA level 3 and like getting and graduating, because they won't have to like pull out to support their family. That means that they can make choices such as going to university or polytechnic and like upskilling, and therefore contributing to the economy in more high skilled work. Thirdly, we think that even if it is true that people like non-contributors like this will result in people like coasting off the UBI, we don't think like the value of someone in society should be like based on how much they contribute, right? This is a deeply like problematic characterization of someone's value, because basically it means that people who are disabled and maybe can't like go to work, people who maybe have mental health issues or aren't, smart enough to become a doctor or an engineer, are inherently like assigned less value. And we think that we should actually principally be like sticking up for these we should be like supporting these vulnerable people and telling them that they are valued, that they do have a place in our community, regardless of how much they can contribute. We don't think this is a principal framework in which we don't think that NEG's principal framework is the one in which this debate should take place. So what do we say then on the harms to poor families? So we gave you several mechanisms at first for how this enfranchises the disadvantaged. What did we tell you at first? We told you that the UBI was better than the targeted unemployment system for the following reasons. Firstly, that there was less red tape, right? That like when you have a system in which you constantly have to prove that you have a disability, when you constantly have to prove that you're seeking for employment, yes, that may seem like it takes 5 minutes to someone living in a stable environment who doesn't have to wonder all the time about whether they'll be kicked out of their rental, who is not constantly trying to find a means to find their family, but to feed their family. But when you are experiencing extremely demoralizing instability, this ability to like go through and like fill all these forms out becomes extremely hard. That's why the likes of like Materia Toure had to fake her circumstances in order to get welfare payments. If it was as easy as the NEG side claimed, then she wouldn't have to do this. Secondly, we told you about the safety net in times of economic uncertainty, right? And this is something that the NEG team cannot provide with targeted welfare payments, because if the economy experiences a sudden economic shock, such as the coronavirus, even if there are like targeted welfare available, there's still like a transition period in between like being unemployed and being able to like get all this paperwork processed, which will actually like allow you to like get this like benefit. And that transition period could mean that families are unable to like meet their next rent deadline. It means that they might miss out on paying a bill. This might mean that they might not be able to feed their family for a few days. This might mean that they end up being evicted from their home. This is right? Like that we have a safety net. So what then we talked about how like increases, and I've already addressed this in the first part of my rebuttal, how it changes people's incentive to like invest in their future and like upskill, because they know they can like do certain things which cost money with the certainty they won't be like unemployed in the future. So what did we hear in response to this? Firstly, we heard that it harms poor families because lots of money is going to middle class and rich people. We modeled this out in our model. We literally said that we would increase income taxes, or at very least existing income taxes would mean that the UBI, like rich and middle, although they would receive the UBI, they would pay this back. This income tax can be used for like all the targeted incentives in parallel to the UBI, which would exist on our side. Secondly, they told us there was less political incentive for other initiatives. We say that no, because all these people who like live through the root causes of some of these issues, like ingrained sexism or racism or like poor mental health services, can still like participate in the political process of like get like electing representatives who care about these policies, which means that like they can still get, you know, there's still like political capital to invest in these like initiatives in parallel to UBI. We don't think that like it's really a realistic characterization that people will just not care. So proud to negate. Affirm.
Thank the speaker for this speech and welcome the second speaker from the opposing team.
Panel, when the opposing team's model for increasing the amount that poor people, people in need, people who are unable to live, involves a system which logically decreases the amount that is going into these funds that these people are being paid, it is unacceptable for them to say that this is going to increase the ability of these people to find jobs, that this is going to increase the ability of these people to live happy, comfortable, fulfilling lives. 3 points for the House in today's debate. Firstly, who are the users of this UBI? What are they going to look like? And how does that differ from the current user base of targeted welfare? Secondly, what is our moral obligation as a society? Who do we prefer when we give out welfare? And thirdly, how does this impact its users differently to targeted welfare? Then I'm going to split and talk to you about the taxpayer's response, how people are going to be feeling about paying more to these people who maybe don't deserve it. So firstly, let's talk about who uses this UBI and how that differs from those who use targeted welfare. What we told you at first is that a lot of these people who are now going to be getting this benefit that weren't getting targeted welfare are the people who aren't giving back to society, are the people who aren't actively seeking after jobs, are the people who aren't actually going to benefit from this welfare, the people who are coasting along. The response from the negative team, from the positive team, was that people need certainty, that people's value shouldn't be dependent on how much they contribute to society. That UBI is only the basics, and so, you know, people won't be able to coast along. We think we have 3 key responses. Firstly, on people being able to not coast along because it's not that much, right? We think this is terrible. We think taking away the incentive for people to work, taking away the incentive for people to get a proper job, and just saying a bit of money, you can just survive on this. These people that may have gotten a job if there was incentive to do so, if the government said, you know what, we're going to give you a big boost if you to start looking for a job, if you can prove that you're going to get a job, these sorts of people are now able to say, I really don't want to get a job. I just want to sort of hang around, and I'm going to live off this this bit of money that the government gives me. We see that this is going to be less than what they would have been able to get if they were able to get into a job, if they were actively seeking a job, and through the unemployment benefit, we see that the standard of living for these people is worse off. Secondly, we heard about the disabled people, the people who can't get a job, the people who are going to be so much more benefited on their side of the house. Look, under this targeted welfare, we already support these people. We say these people, as long as you're actively making a contribution to society, as long as you're actively looking for a job, as long as you're putting an effort that's proportional to what you're able to do, no matter what that may be, no matter how small that may be, then we're willing to reward you. It's the people who are taking directly from society with no input, the people who are saying, we are not going to engage with the system you have set up to help us. These are the people that we believe we do not have a moral duty to be giving welfare to. So secondly, in today's debate, how is this preferable to targeted welfare? What we told you is that targeted welfare gives money to the people who need it in the situations when they need it, when they need it. The main contention from the opposing team was about certainty, was that people would be left in the lurch, and without this certainty from a UBI, they're not able to achieve their goals. We have two responses to this. Firstly, there is certainty under the current system. We support increasing this current system, and we say that, as Travis has already told you, that the process is not hard to do. The process is relatively simplistic. As long as you prove that you're moving towards a more stable income, as long for things like the unemployment benefit, it's very easy to get this benefit. And secondly, it's meant to be a short-term thing. It's meant to be a thing that just lasts while you're looking for this job, while you need it, not a long-term thing that people can just coast and ride off of. I'll take your POI if you have one.
How can you claim that a system is efficient when people with permanent brain damage must prove it twice a year to a group of bureaucrats?
Look, firstly, we think that these people do not have to go through significant bureaucratic process to get this benefit. There are methods in place to make it easy for them. And secondly, this is not the majority of people. These people are already benefited under the system. But what we're saying is that their payments are going to decrease because of the ability of the government to pay more. So that's what I'm just about to talk about now. What is the actual payment system going to look like? We heard that the rich people are going to be paying more, but then also getting more back. We see that it doesn't really make any sense at all, right? If I'm paying $40,000 a year extra in taxes, but then getting $40,000 a year back in taxes, I'm not paying anything, I'm not contributing anything to this UBI. So either there's no extra money to go to this UBI, that there's no extra income to support this UBI, the extension of which would mean that this money is coming from the existing welfare systems, the welfare systems that specifically target the people who need it, who is distributing this targeted welfare which only barely scratches the surface of what is needed, that you're distributing this over everyone, or that the burden is falling on those lower class people, those people who really do need the income that they're earning, the people that aren't able to support themselves fully. If we're going to support a progressive tax, then we need to see much more significant, we need to see that this is actually going to be able to redistribute wealth, not just have a net zero effect on the people at the top, as the team has been saying. Thirdly, we heard about how this would decrease demonization from the upper class. We say that this is going to do the exact opposite, right? When you see that people in society who seem to be doing absolutely nothing are getting thousands of dollars a year that's coming out of your pocket, rather than people who actually need it, people who the government have deemed necessary, this is actually going to have a massive increase on the amount of animosity and the amount of hatred that's felt towards these people, that it's going to make them harder to succeed in society. Lastly, then, let's talk about the taxpayer's response. People who are willing to pay a part of their income as tax towards, when they can see where it's going towards, especially many in the upper parts of society, the wealthy, resent their income being spent on things like welfare. When tax rates increase, we see that tax evasion will also increase. For the most part, it's only the very wealthy that evade tax as it stands. However, when tax rates suddenly increase, as they will under a UBI, we're going to see a much greater incentive to evade tax. The middle class who feels justified because a lot of their wealth is hard earned. They're going to be evading more tax. This harms the aims of the UBI and also harms the aims of general taxation. It harms other critical areas of government spending, which disproportionately impacts the poor. We also are going to see businesses critical for the New Zealand economy moving away. When the tax rates increase, these profit-driven companies have incentive to move away. We saw this with things like Cadbury moving to Australia, thousands of people losing their jobs. At their very best, the AF system tries to improve employment, but when the system that they use to do this actively harms these people, we win today's debate.
Hi, sorry about dropping out earlier with the camera out. The audio was dropping out. Sorry.
Thanks, Speaker, for this speech, and welcome the third speaker from the affirming team.
Side negating is arguing for a system which continues to perpetuate inequality, which continues to leave people in poverty, a system which does not work. It's time for change. We see 3 points of clash in this debate. Is targeted welfare or UBI the most effective way? Its effectiveness at helping individuals, and the morals of giving it to people who don't work, who are just leeching from society. So, first things first, we've explained targeted welfare and how it's the most effective way. We've explained how it helps the most disadvantaged through things like providing stability, and they've tried to talk about how this will, in fact, is already okay because we have job seekers benefits, and we pointed out that it can take a while to get this, and they then tried to say that actually you can apply for them quite easily, not realizing that it still takes a long time to get these benefits. Also, Ronan and Ella explained how this is particularly harmful for people with disabilities, particularly mental ones, who need to go and prove it to a team of bureaucrats twice a year in order to get this.
Yeah, why?
This is simply not acceptable, not right now. And so we've explained how these benefits in the long term, not just short term while you're seeking a job, help you by allowing you to do things like long-term planning, for example, looking after your kids in the crucial early childhood development period, and that hasn't been responded to enough. They also said that we're going to be, we're going to be passing off the job, that because we've got universal basic income, don't need to worry about it, they'll be fine. But we've explained how people with disabilities or face challenges still have political capital. And they said that the system is fine. We don't want to move to UBI because it already works and it already protects people. But they also acknowledge we still have homeless people. We still have people who are suffering. The current system is not working, and that's a problem. They talked about backlash, but Ella has addressed that and how everyone's going to be getting it, so it's fine. They talked about government spending and rich getting it, but these are both covered by a model. So I'm not sure where that was coming from. We explained how there's going to be a progressive tax rate, taxing the richest people the most, and to cover it. So I'm not entirely sure where this is coming from. And they talked about, it's weird. We've explained. We didn't say net zero. We said that the rich people are going to be getting taxed more to help the poor people. And so the system is not correct. Yes.
So when the rich people are taxed more, won't they be angry that they're bearing the burden, and therefore won't there be this backlash that we have discussed?
First of all, there'd be no more backlash in the regular tax. And additionally, this money isn't just being set on fire. There are a number of social benefits you get from taxing, which I will be going into in a bit. So at the end of this point, we've shown that targeted welfare is not the most effective way. It has bureaucracy, which can be particularly harmful for those who struggle anyway, like mental difficulties. And it does not provide the long-term stability that a UBI does, because it's only when you're seeking a job, and it's not as effective because we still have people who are suffering. It's not working. And we've clearly won this point. The next point of clash is about its effectiveness at helping individuals. We've explained how, for example, workers can negotiate with their bosses for higher wages, and the opposition tried to claim that the bosses just won't do this. They'll fire people, or they might reduce their wages. We don't. A, they're less like they're not likely to do this, and I'll be explaining why. But B, if they do, it's fine, because we have universal basic income. The workers can negotiate harder, because if the bosses fire them, then they're okay. They might not be able to afford that brand new iPhone, but they're not going to starve. So they can negotiate higher wages, and they have a safety net. And yeah, if the bosses, even if they do reduce their wages, they're going, the people are going to be okay because of UBI. And this is also going to keep bigger companies like Cadbury in. This is going to maintain the economy. And additionally, they talked about like hyperinflation, how hyperinflation is going to occur, but we haven't seen that in the past. We've had minimum wage increases and welfare, and the economy has not collapsed. Additionally, we're not creating money. We're not printing money. We're redistributing it. That money is already in the economy. We're just sending it to a different source. It's going to maintain the similar levels of slow, gradual, good inflation that we have now. And so at the end of this point, it's not going to harm the economy. It's not going to harm workers. It's going to lead to the same or potentially better. And so this is going to lead to better outcomes for everyone involved. Finally, the point about morals. Is it morally okay to give money to people who aren't working? So first things first, everyone is valuable. Everyone, we're talking about providing it to New Zealand citizens. These are our people, and everyone contributes something. No one is completely without merit. Additionally, if people are going to be morally obligated to work and to produce what they can, should we not also be morally obligated to support them? If we're expecting something from people, we also need to give them something in return, and that is what this does. People can. Additionally, we support the super wealthy. We give them tax breaks or tax rebates, or pay them out for lending for some complex bureaucratic thing that no one cares about except the rich. We help them. Why should we not help our most vulnerable citizens? So at the end of this, we've shown that we morally have the responsibility to support our people, to support our citizens. We support everyone, and we expect things from them, and that's okay. But expectations need to come with rewards. Otherwise, it's an unjust system. So at the end of this debate, we've shown that targeted welfare is the most effective way to help people. It reduces the stress and allows for long-term planning. It results in less backlash than other systems to help similar people. It's not going to harm the economy and could potentially help it through helping workers to get more benefits, by allowing businesses to give better outcomes. And we've shown that morally, it's the right thing to do. If we're expecting things from people, we should give them something in return. Proud to affirm.
Thank the speaker for this speech, and welcome the third speaker from Waikato to conclude their team's substantive material.
The problem of inequality is a complex one. It's an issue caused by historic injustices in capital allocation, issues caused by the prevalence of the global elite in lawmaking, and the unfair nature of the lottery of birth. These are issues that a universal basic income will not solve. They are issues that side affirming will not solve. Throughout this debate, our side of the house was consistently the one that actually recognized the reasons behind global inequalities and actually helped solve them. When side affirming tells you that a UBI is the be-all, end-all of inequality and doesn't actually properly engage with the harms of a UBI, they lose today's debate. I bring you 3 points of clash in my speech. Firstly, on whether a UBI combats inequality. Secondly, on the efficacy of alternatives such as welfare and education services. And thirdly, on whether nations have a duty to provide a UBI. Firstly, we're going to talk about whether a UBI combats inequality. This is the most important point of clash in this debate because ultimately both sides wanted to be the side that had the best outcomes for equality. We were very clear right from first that a UBI is ineffective in adequately and correctly combating the inequalities that plague the current world. Let's take a moment to be very clear on what happened when a UBI was introduced. A, firms would have been incentivized to lower wages as it now appears that people are receiving more money and like their costs are covered by a UBI like you told us at third. And secondly, that landowners and stores would be incentivized to raise prices as people are now seen to just have more money and that their market has more money. The only response on this that it wouldn't happen because it's just redistribution didn't make much sense because look, printing money isn't the only thing that makes prices go up. When a market has more money, the stores and people like landowners, landlords, etc. will raise prices in turn at the point it appears that they can get more money from the people that they're selling things to. Even if a UBI can replace a lot of these harms, it just serves to separate the poor and middle class more. Okay, with that set in mind, let's talk about why AF was adamant that a UBI would somehow combat issues of inequality. Their main contention surrounded certainty. There were two aspects to this. Firstly, that a UBI was constant and unconditional, therefore it would reduce fears of losing your job. We have two responses to this. Firstly, sure, now you don't worry about losing your job. You now worry that your job isn't paying you enough to get by at the point that employers think you have a UBI. You now worry that your employer no longer values you as much as a middle or upper class employee that doesn't rely on a UBI to get by. Secondly, the only constant that exists in the world of these people now is the constant worry that they can't afford anything at the point where your landlord is charging you double the price because they say, hey, you have a UBI, you should be able to pay this, right? Because ultimately, a lot of people who are in upper classes, landlords, store owners who are profit seeking will seek to get this UBI money from the lower classes for their own benefit. That's something that happens when like minimum wages are increased. That's something that happens when a UBI is introduced. The second contention they had was that this would reduce uncertainty from major disasters such as COVID-19. Okay, we have three responses to this. Firstly, New Zealand has pretty good welfare systems and a government that works very hard to minimize uncertainty. When COVID-19 hit New Zealand, we didn't stand by idly. We allocated $50 billion to reduce uncertainty. That's something that happens under the status quo. Secondly, we tell that no matter what happens, there will still be some uncertainty. It's not a problem that AF totally eliminates. At the point there's like a major disaster affecting the entire world, the most we can do is minimize it, not address it entirely. Thirdly, we tell you that it's much, much worse at the point there's a major upfront cost to the government for a UBI and that prices in general are higher. These increased prices are something that makes like the entire economy for especially for people of lower socioeconomic status far worse during times of disaster. All right. We were clear down the line that a UBI that gives money, especially to like everyone, including the rich, is quite ineffective as it like allocates support money to people who don't need it, such as the rich. The only response we heard to this from the affirmative side was that, oh, but the tax, that's modeled out because the tax takes money from the rich. Okay, but you're still giving them the money. If you're taxing money from the rich, the opportunity cost now is that you're not spending that money on things like educational services, on things like actually helping the poor people. You're taking money from the rich and then giving it straight back to them. There's no actual benefits that you see there. You'd be much better off doing it somewhere else, doing it through allocating welfare services, etc. A UBI doesn't address the actual issues that cause inequality and poverty. It merely covers them up. Lastly, on this point, we told you that there would be backlash from the rich, and the only response was that, oh, but the rich don't backlash anyway, they will currently pay taxes. But look, now you're raising taxes. At the point they're losing more money to these taxes, there's an incentive to backlash, especially seeing as it doesn't benefit them at all. Taking a step back here, we see that inequality isn't solved on their side of the house. It isn't made better on their side of the house, and they don't solve any of the issues they came to solve. They only make things worse. All right, secondly, we're going to move on then to the efficacy of alternatives. We supported on our side of the house a nuanced solution that involved targeted welfare, employment schemes, etc. The contentions here from side affirming were fairly weak. They told us that, for example, people don't like current welfare systems because they involve an unnecessary bureaucracy. They take a long time to and are quite difficult. We told you down the line that firstly, that just wasn't true because like welfare systems have an incentive to be easily accessible. That's the reason they work in the first place. The like only contention we heard here was that like someone in a wheelchair or like someone who's like mentally deficient will find it quite difficult in order to like communicate with someone who's like a bureaucrat, etc. But we tell you that's again not what happens. Like the people that you apply to for welfare services are people like social workers. You have liaison workers that help you out with this. The government does realize that there are people in need. They're not stupid enough to just throw people away because they ultimately realize that the real point of a welfare system is actually to help these people. That's something that they do care about. That's something that does occur. The second contingent here was that welfare would leave people stuck in a cycle where they are barely getting by. We tell you that still happens under a UBI. Under a UBI, people still become reliant on the money they get to it. They're still stuck in a cycle where they're receiving the bare minimum amount. Side affirmative does not solve this. A UBI is not a safety net any more than a welfare system is. Okay. Let's take a step back. These systems try to fix the root cause. The systems that we support, welfare systems, try to fix the root causes of inequality while minimizing short-term risks. They're not perfect, but they're working and they're getting far better. A UBI doesn't do that. It appears to just be a patch over a massive hole and doesn't actually alleviate many of the risks that many of the like issues that plague inequality. It reduces people's incentive to actually help people in low socioeconomic classes at the point where you can wave them away and say that these people are just getting by on their UBI. That's incredibly harmful. Last thing, very quickly, we're talking about whether people have a duty to provide a UBI. This isn't that important in this debate, as ultimately the real benefits here were the practical outcomes of equality and inequality. We were very clear though down the line that nations should not like continuously support those who contribute nothing to society. They should rather help educate. They should rather like help educate, bring people up and like provide short-term benefits to help people get back on their feet, get back into a position where they can like provide things that are highly beneficial. At the end of this debate, we're the side of the house that sees actual outcomes for equality. We're the side of the house that realizes how to fix these problems at the root. Very proud to negate.
Thank the speaker for this speech, and as customary, reverse the order and now welcome the reply speaker from the negating team to conclude their team's case.
The fundamental problem in this debate is when the government decides to give millions of dollars to rich, white, upper-class individuals that, one, don't deserve the money, and two, don't need the money, instead of using this government revenue to targeted spending for subsidization of goods that poor communities actually need, where poor communities are suffering. We see 2 points of clash in this debate. Firstly, where does the duty lie towards the government? And secondly, how do these different alternatives actually benefit or harm poor communities? Firstly, on duty. We told you that firstly, people exploit the system when they refuse to try to search to unemployment just because they don't want to or they're content with not working. They told us that it's not fair to only value contributions to society. We had a response telling you that we're not discriminating against disabled persons. We still provide social care services and mental health services to support them. We are talking about people who have the ability to find a job, who have the ability to work, but actively choose not to, even though they are able-bodied and they have the ability to contribute to society. It's not like something that it is out of their control. Secondly, on the burden to the taxpayer, we say that you incentivize the rich to evade their taxes because there's going to be this severe backlash when they don't want to pay these increases in taxes. We tell you that you can't just give them back the same amount of money you're taking away, because then you're not facilitating the rise in government spending that you want to see in the world. Thirdly, the fundamental problem is that you're giving millions of dollars to the rich upper class who don't need it nor deserve it. We think that is morally wrong. This government spending and this social safety net should be going to these poor communities. That's the most important thing to consider. It should be going to the people that actually need it. Even on this point alone, we win. Secondly, does it actually benefit the poor? We told you that a lump sum of money doesn't solve the racial injustices or institutional barriers in society. Without specific subsidization of educational training, workers still can't compete with the wealthier individuals who has private tutoring or have the networking connections for their parents, or focusing on their energy. The government should focus energy on anti-harassment policies, reducing discrimination in the workforce, policing unlawful firing policies. We think that's a more important use of their funds. Secondly, we said that the opposing team's response was uncertainty. We had a few responses to this. Firstly, people still have certainty. If a recession occurs, then they'll just fall onto the unemployment benefit, right? That's why we have a social safety net in a welfare state. They know that the government will support them, especially when we save more funds to increase the unemployment benefit and give more certainty when we don't have to pay millions of dollars to the rich. Secondly, we tell you that welfare was never meant to be a long-term policy. We don't want people to just accept their lot in life, that they have to be on the universal base income forever because the world is hard. We don't want consistent long-term policy that forces people to accept this dismal reality that they'll only be able to purchase the bare essentials for the rest of their life. We want poor communities to work towards self-improvement, to actually rise out of poverty, to achieve the same living standards, to actually have a car, afford their own house, not just rent and a subsistence wage. We don't want them to just dismally accept their lot in life. On red tape, we said that the problem is exaggerated by the opposing team. It doesn't take 4 months to apply for a job seeker's allowance, but also that we provide specific liaison workers and social care workers that help people who are struggling with this or have specific mental disabilities or illnesses. Finally, we tell you that there are reasons why the poor suffer under a universal basic income. Firstly, that when you flood the economy with cash, you accelerate rises in the cost of living. And when rent is rising by 150% and you are spending 80% of your universal income that you receive straight out of the gate on utilities, you're not actually seeing a benefit at all. Secondly, there's no incentive for self-improvement. You're not forcing them to actively seek employment like you are in the job seekers allowance. There aren't those same qualifications. Therefore, you're going to be stuck on this subsistence wage in this lower class. Thirdly, firms will refuse to grant pay rises to these workers. They feel like their incomes has already risen by enough and they don't feel like they have a claim to promotions or increases. This just means that the middle class stay above the lower class, and income inequalities will still exist in any society the opposing team tries to make you believe. Proud to negate.
Thank the speaker for their speech and welcome the reply speaker from Kahurangi-Marlborough to conclude the round robin of this tournament.
we won this debate at the point at which Waikato's entire case was contingent on a very blatant mischaracterization of our own. One main question in this debate: is the UBI effective at enfranchising the working class, the disabled, people in low socioeconomic conditions? What did we tell you right out the gate? We told you that in order to reap the benefits of targeted welfare, it is a convoluted system in order to, provide proof that you have a disability, provide constant proof that you are still seeking employment, providing for the next. You're sure when you be your next meal, you're unsure what your future will be in general. This is an extremely difficult process for you to go through, and there's a lot of red tape to kind of navigate. What do we hear in response to that from the negating team? They drastically understated the impact of red tape. Takes like 5 minutes, and they said that our entire case was that disabled people to work to find unemployment forms on their behalf. This isn't true. Our case was that when people are experiencing,
I think we're losing you. We're actually losing you. You're just breaking up. So is your connection stable? How's that going? Because a couple of times you froze and the words have stopped. So
can we try people turning off video, please?
Yeah, just turn the video off and see if that makes it better.
Do I turn my video off too?
Yes, Ella, that'll be good.
Sorry, I wasn't aware of that.
No, I stopped you as soon as it became a problem. It's all right. Okay.
Okay. It's extreme. So then, that in times of sudden economic shock, such as the coronavirus taking out the entire hospitality industry, that the UBI provides softens the blow for the transition between being unemployment benefit, and that transition time is crucial in people being able to make their rent, pay their bills, etc. We did not hear any specific response to this transition. So then what do we say? We told you about certainty. When you know that your income isn't going to be suddenly cut off, you can invest in, you can take a student loan and going to university, or stay in school and not going into the workforce straight away, which means that people who are at the bottom, who are unable to mobilize up the ladder, are actually able to upskill and level the playing field for themselves. What did we hear in response to this? We heard about hyperinflation. What did we tell you about hyperinflation? Firstly, that it was extremely exaggerated by the negating team, that food prices don't go up 200%, as the first speaker would like to characterize, when minimum wages are increased. This is akin to a minimum wage increase. But secondly, that even at the point where your purchasing power is the same or slightly less in our world, we explained why the UBI is better than a wage, because it's not contingent on having employment, which is really important in times of recession or COVID-19, when there aren't that many jobs around for working class people, because, for example, the entire hospitality industry is shut out. They told us that we're giving money to rich people and they will get mad and evade taxes. We told you that we would increase income taxes. We kind of modeled this out. We told you that we would increase income taxes so that the rich would still have to pay more than they were receiving in the UBI. Secondly, they said that they also said that it doesn't address the root issues of poverty. But what did we tell you? We said that when you have root issues such as racism or sexism that people are living through every day, the people experiencing these circumstances still have an incentive to they still have a political stake in their future, right? They still have an incentive to elect representatives who will address this issue for them and who will care about their issue and make change. Proud to affirm.